All right, everyone, welcome back into another fantasy football video. Today, we're going to be breaking down the best handcuffs for your best ball drafts and also season-long drafts. There is a slight difference that we'll talk about at the start of this video, but then we're going to go ahead and break down all my favorite handcuffs. And to me, all of these handcuffs are going to be players that could potentially win you your best ball draft or, potentially your season-long leagues as well. Let's go ahead and get into it. So I want to go ahead and talk about just like basic strategy when it comes to best ball drafts and really what you're trying to do when you're handcuffing. It really depends on how many drafts that you're going to be doing. So right now I haven't gotten too many drafts in on DraftKings just yet for best ball drafts. I kind of start out with Underdog, but what I want to call out here is going to be kind of the percentage here. Okay. And this is an approach that I'm taking on purpose. It's a purposeful approach here. And that's the fact that I got Blake Corum in about 33% of my drafts because I've drafted Kyren Williams in about 31% of my drafts. Okay, the whole thought process about this is, are we actually handcuffing Kyren Williams to Blake Corum in these drafts necessarily? And this is where it really depends on what types of drafts you are doing, and that's very important. So let's say you are someone that's doing about 150 drafts or kind of max entering in that regard, basically anything over 20 drafts in total. What I would say you would want to do is you would want to actually split up the drafts that you're getting Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. So you wouldn't actually be handcuffing those two together in the sense that you're getting them in the same draft. You can do that, but that does limit your upside. The whole point of doing handcuffs in the sense that I'm talking about when you're doing 150 lineups or drafts is that you want to get the same percentage. So if you are going out of your way to draft Kyren Williams like I am, because I think his ADP is going late, I'm actually going to be attempting to also match my exposure for Blake Corum in different drafts. And the whole point of that is to raise the upside, raise my potential to win in other leagues. So if Kyren Williams ends up getting injured in certain drafts, I could have Blake Corum in that draft, and that's going to definitely raise my floor, okay? But let's say Kyren Williams gets injured, and instead of drafting Kyren Williams in a draft, let's say I have Josh Jacobs, who's going about the same ADP, and we're just going to use a running back just for example purposes. If I had Josh Jacobs, and then I can also attach Blake Corum to that as a late round pick, that's obviously raising the ceiling much higher there, okay? Whereas if you're actually directly handcuffing the two in a draft, that's just going to raise your floor up a little bit. And I think those two are actually a good starting point for this video. And I hope that concept makes sense to you, okay? Because the reason you're going to do this is to raise your floor. And so again, if you are drafting 31% of Kyren Williams, then you also are going to want to be intentional about going out and getting about 31% of Blake Corum in other best ball drafts, not in the exact same one if you are doing 150 lineups. Now, obviously, if you're doing season long drafts, or if you're doing like single entry or like, 10 entry max drafts, there's a bunch of different ones, then you could actually think about directly handcuffing them, because then if you're raising your floor, that doesn't matter as much. But in terms of, obviously trying to chase that grand prize, you want to be chasing the ceiling. And so that's a better approach to go. So let's actually shift over and talk about actually why Blake Corum is actually a great handcuff to Kyren Williams. So one of the things I want to talk about is actually like last year with Blake Corum, there was a weird narrative going on with him that he was going to instantly be the running back handcuff to target. His ADP was actually higher last year than it is this year, which to me is hilarious. It's funny how that works out with, rookies that just naturally get a lot of hype, even though it doesn't necessarily make. If you guys remember last year, I was telling you to draft this guy right here, Ronnie Rivers, okay? Because I was like, all right, if Kyren Williams gets injured at the start of the season or throughout the year until the end of the season, it's actually going to be Ronnie Rivers that benefits the most. He is the running back handcuff that you want to be targeting. Now, thankfully, if you actually drafted Kyren Williams, you're going to have to worry about it because he played the whole season, which was pretty awesome, okay? Now, I don't think it's actually going to be Ronnie Rivers this year. I do think it's going to be Blake Corum as the handcuff. And so with that, because we don't have to worry about whether or not Blake Corum is going to be the handcuff, we're actually getting him at an insane value, guys, right now. So last year he was going about pick 122. This year is going about pick 190. And so you guys saw in that graphic, I got him about 33%, where I'm only getting Kyren Williams about 31%. And that's because he's going super late, and it shouldn't be happening. Like, he is going to be the direct handcuff. I know they drafted Jarquez Hunter, but when has Sean McVay really, besides Puka Nacua, really let a rookie go, right? That just doesn't happen. You need to gain his trust. And so you got Blake Corum having one more year developed. Yeah, he's going to be the handcuff. He's going to be the one you want to be targeting. And if we just go ahead and take a peek at his game, like, he did start to see more and more snaps as the season progressed. The thing, though, with Sean McVay is he's not going to be someone that's he just commits to Kyren Williams. He likes Kyren Williams. You'd like to have a plan to limit Kyren Williams' carries, but when push comes to shove, when you're in the heat of it in a game, you're just going to let your best players play, and that has been something that he has done. And so with that being said, if that does lead to Kyren Williams potentially being injured after 2 years of having a heavy workload, then Blake Corum is going to be that guy, and we did see him actually get some carries on the later end of the season, and he looked fine getting those carries as well. And I think we can draft him with confidence, especially where he's going ADP-wise. Now, that's not even my favorite handcuff for the LA Rams. My favorite handcuff for the LA Rams, and that's Jordan Whittington. Okay, Jordan Whittington was actually a player I hyped up a decent amount after the preseason last year, because if you just swapped his and Puka Nakua's jersey numbers, you wouldn't see a difference. Like, literally, it was strange. And he dominated in the preseason just like Puka Nakua did. Now, I'm not going to say he's Puka Nakua, but I kind of am. Like, you could say he's a poor man's version, but you can see why Sean McVay drafted him, and he looked really good last year. And there was a few games last year where he did need to step up into kind of that receiver number one role, and he was able to do so very well. So last year we know that Puka Nakua was injured throughout the season, at the start of the season for sure, and I was thinking that Jordan Whittington would come in and instantly kind of beat Puka Nakua, and it took a while for that to develop. We saw in week 2 and week 3 actually Nakua saw some like weird snap share where it seemed like in week 2 he's going to actually take a bigger snap share in week 3, which he did, but he was still somewhat limited. Then in week 4 we saw him get 97% of the snaps, end up having 8 targets, 6 catches for 62 yards. Okay, so very similar usage as to someone like Puka Nakua. And then you look at week 5 against the Green Bay Packers. Okay, played in 71 snaps, ran 41 routes, had 10 targets, 7 catches for 89 yards. So obviously very good stuff there. That to me it's not obviously as good as Puka Nakua in terms of a direct replacement, but you do see him get a heavy target share, heavy snap share, and very good production in PPR leagues. So it's a very limited sample size that we have here, but we see 12.2 points in PPR, full point PPR, and then 15.9 points in full point PPR. So only a 2-game stretch in there, but again, that's really all they need him for, as he is, that direct replacement for someone like Puka Nakua. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because last year they had Cooper Kupp on their team. They have actually added in Davante Adams this year. And so if you look at how Davante Adams plays, it's a little bit different compared to Cooper Kupp. It's much more like Puka Nakua. And I think that was very intentional there by Sean McVay and the whole LA Rams coaching staff. And so with that, I do think if one of the two players, obviously Davante Adams is pretty old, Puka Nakua obviously suffered some injuries last year. If one of those two were to get injured, I do think we can directly swap in Jordan Whittington into that role, into a starting role like we saw happen last year. The issue that we have there is that we probably aren't going to get any other production from him if one of those two players do not get injured, but that's where it does become a direct handcuff. Okay, now this is a little bit different than what I said about Blake Corum and Kyren Williams. I actually think if you draft Davante Adams or Puka Nakua, I'd be pretty happy to get Jordan Whittington as a direct handcuff in best ball drafts, specifically because you can get him in the last round of your drafts and feel pretty comfortable with that. And I think there's a good chance that he is someone that actually gives you some startability, maybe 3 starts throughout the season as like a back-end player on your bench. You will take that. If you can get at least 1 start from the player at the end of your best ball draft, you would take that. I think Jordan Whittington is someone that gives us a great chance at doing that. So one of the funniest things last year that happened in best ball drafts was Josh Jacobs was in some situations going in like the 6th round, okay? And this was something I was begging people to do, is just draft him. I was like, he's a borderline 1st round pick. What are people doing that he's like going in the early 6th round in some cases, okay? 5th round, likely 4th round, like it was strange, okay? I was begging people to draft Josh Jacobs because it was pretty clear that he was going to be the workhorse running back. The reason why people were afraid of drafting Josh Jacobs was because the Packers drafted Marshawn Lloyd. Okay, if you bought into that narrative last year, okay, I could, it was dumb. Okay, I could kind of get that. But why in the heck would Marshawn Lloyd be going much later than he is this year? Okay, Josh Jacobs obviously got a heavy workload last year. A lot of people are maybe worried about Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks, both 2 players that honestly, if they had speed, like if they had, top end speed, they would probably be top running backs in the league. Like they have great vision, great patience. They're good runners. They don't have that top end speed. Lloyd does have that explosiveness. He does remind me of those 2 players, just better. He is a Josh Jacobs type of running back. And I don't like to predict injuries at all, but maybe that heavy workload does get to Jacobs. I would not like that. I'm a Packers fan. I'm wearing a Packers hat as I'm recording this video. But the fact that we're getting Lloyd at pick 192 when we were able to get him last year at about 139, that to me is insane. Okay, that's an overcorrection. Okay, people were definitely a little bit too zealous on drafting him last year, whereas this year it's like they thought they were wrong, which they were, but now they're overcorrecting. And same thing obviously has happened with Blake Corum. These are two pretty darn solid running backs to get in handcuff scenarios. Now this is going to be much more like Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, where if you are drafting Josh Jacobs in about 150, best ball drafts, then you want to do it a little bit differently, where in different drafts you're going to go out of your way to draft Marshawn Lloyd. Now maybe you guys don't think it's going to be him. Maybe you think it's going to be Chris Brooks or Emmanuel Wilson. Then you're probably staying away. I do think there's actually a very good chance, though, if Jacobs gets injured, Lloyd would be the running back that we would want. Okay, so the next handcuff that I want to talk about is actually going to be Malik Washington. Okay, and the handcuff would be to Tyreek Hill. Now this is something that I kind of like last year as well. The issue that we have is I didn't really love the film on Malik Washington actually too much as I went back and watched it this offseason, whereas last year at the time I was like, yeah, he's a poor man's version of Tyreek Hill. He can be used in the same ways that Tyreek Hill can be used. Obviously not a direct replacement. No one's going to replace Tyreek Hill in that sense, but I was much more bullish on that take as I am right now. But at the same time, Malik Washington is basically going undrafted, and I do still think that there's a good chance that with Tyreek Hill, with all this, like, there's just weird stuff going on with him throughout this offseason, talking about, wanting to retire. He has a hand injury going on last year or this year. Last year was banged up throughout the whole season. Just a lot of weird stuff going on with him. It wouldn't be surprising to maybe see, Tyreek Hill maybe not even end up on the Dolphins at the end of the year. I could see that happen. That's within the realm of possibilities. But with all the negative stuff that's going on, I think it does make sense to attempt to handcuff Tyreek Hill in a sense with a receiver, and I think that receiver would be Malik Washington. Some people might say it's Westbrook Ikine. Maybe they're different types of receivers, but if you look at how Malik Washington can be used, it is in the same realm of Tyreek Hill. Getting some bubble screens, getting some end arounds. He's going to be moving around a lot in the offense, a lot of motion stuff, and so with that, I don't mind him. Now, when we pull up his game log from last year, it was pretty unfortunate for him that he did start off, injured and DNPing there, whereas as the season progressed, he really wasn't used all too much. We can clearly see that. But as they see, at the end of the season, 38, 55, 50, 41, he did get used a little bit more as the season progressed. And we did see him get some short yardage work, 5 targets, 52 yards, 3 receptions, 28 yards, 4 receptions, 41 yards, 4 receptions, 48 yards. So did get used, not as much in the rushing game as I would have thought on the tail end of the season. Now, you got to remember last year ended up being a wash season for them. Quarterback play was not always there. It was just a mess, really, offensively for them. And so if Tua is going to be active throughout the whole season, obviously that's a big quarterback upgrade. And I do like the fact that they did bring in Zach Wilson, who, if Tua were to get another concussion, the offense isn't completely lost as it was. I know a lot of people bash on Zach Wilson, but I think he's going to be a competent backup. Okay, I think we can be. I wouldn't say we're happy, but we'd be fine with it. And so again, a decent little handcuff there. Now I do want to talk about another handcuff for the Miami Dolphins. And it's not actually going to be Alexander Madison, who I have pictured here, but I do want to call it. He was brought in for Miami. I do think there's a chance he could actually be the running back that ends up with the most touchdowns for them. I'm not saying draft him, but I am saying I have thought about that. They also brought in Ali Gordon, the former Oklahoma State running back, who kind of a similar bigger back that I think that's kind of its own battle. It's like, who's going to be the short yards back? But then there's another player who, for Devon Achane, I think he's just a direct swap. So guys, last year I put out this kind of tweet from some of the film from Jalen Wright. I just really liked his awareness and speed. He honestly reminded me at the start of the season of Devon Achane at the start of the season as well. I'm not going to say he was Devon Achane 2.0, but I do think he was someone that actually really popped. And rumor is he's actually gained some muscle this offseason as well, probably to maybe get a little bit more of that short yards work. But I do think if we were to see Devon Achane, if Achane were to get injured, I do think it would be Jalen Wright. Now, maybe in the sense that Devon Achane was kind of used to replace Tyreek Hill in the passing game somewhat last year because he just obviously wasn't productive, was banged up. Tyreek Hill, that is. I don't think Jalen Wright would get used in that same regard, but I do think in the running backs, scheme, it would be Jalen Wright. And again, he's going pretty late. Again, I think that's a better separate running back handcuff. But at the same time, I do think maybe we do see a little bit more of a two-headed monster, maybe a three-headed monster. I mentioned, one of the bigger backs couldn't it be in the goal line backs. And if Achan's going to be involved in the passing game, maybe they do try to limit his snaps a little bit. Maybe Jalen Wright does have some lone appeal as well, but we don't want to go crazy with that. So one of my favorite offenses to really target has actually been the Denver Broncos. You look at something like Courtland Sutton, who's just going extremely late for a guy that's a clear end, kind of workhorse receiver. He's going to be heavily targeted throughout the season. He's going in like the 5th round in some cases. Like in DraftKings best ball drafts, I think you can make an argument that he should be a 2nd round pick, maybe 3rd round if you want to get there as well. He is clearly going too late. That being said, his handcuff is also a player that is likely going to be the receiver number 2 in that offense alone. So not only does he have standalone appeal, he also does have some pretty darn good handcuff appeal as well, because I do think he is much more of the replacement for Courtland Sutton than some of the other receivers that are in that offense. And so if we just pull up the depth chart, I'm actually curious as to what people are thinking, which player I'm going to pick. Now, if you watched this channel last year, you know it. You're already screaming in your head. You know who it is. But some people will be like, oh, it's Troy Franklin. It's Pat Bryant, maybe even A.T. Perry. I doubt that. It's actually Devon Valet. Guys, you look at last year, he was someone that was productive. He was someone that they obviously really like. Now, he was an older rookie last year, but he looked, the part. He looked like someone that could actually be a good replacement to Courtland Sutton. And if you look at it, at times last year, he did get a heavy snap share, but that's the key takeaway. It was only at times last year. Sean Payton was very annoying with his snap counts. It was Courtland Sutton, and that was basically it. That's the only player you could trust other than obviously Bo Nix. So I do think that maybe with another training camp and year under his belt, Devon Valet is going to be much more appealing to that coaching staff and could expand on the role that he had last year. So let's go ahead and pull up his kind of stats from last year. So last year, guys, I was super excited after week 1. I saw that he played, a decent amount of the snaps last year, 34 in week 1, had 8 receptions, 39 receiving yards on 8 targets. I was like, all right, we nailed this. One of my favorite sleeper picks. We absolutely nailed this. And then you look at week 2, week 3, week 4, and week 5, nothing. He was a healthy scratch, and it was really one of the situations where it was a head scratcher, because you're like, what is going on? How does he go from getting that many snaps, getting so much praise in training camp, to not playing for 5 straight weeks? It was definitely strange. Okay, and then we see him come back, instantly get 34 snaps again, and get 4 receptions, 70 receiving yards, 6 targets. So already right there, guys, in the 2 games that he played, he already paid off his best ball ADP. He already paid off for you guys, because you likely got a start out of those 2. Chances are maybe in your flex, maybe in your receiver number 3 spot, but obviously, getting 10 plus points in PPR is pretty huge, especially for a player that, on the last pick of your drafts, you're not expecting to get any starts from. But then he still had some decent games mixed in there. So you look at week 10, again, like 35 snaps in that game, 4 receptions, 39 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Okay, then 4 receptions. Like, he ended up being actually someone that was pretty beneficial to have at the end of the season last year. And on top of that, there is this tweet that just came out from a beat reporter here, take it for what it's worth, but he has been the receiver that has been working alongside of Courtland Sutton, and rumor is that he has added some muscle this offseason as well. And if you look at his ADP, again, he's someone that's basically going undrafted in all drafts, and he's likely to be the receiver number 2 in the Broncos offense. Now, you might be saying Marvin Mims, he's more of a gadget type player, like he could have splash games, and I think, that's fine to have that thought, but Mims is going much higher than Valet, where he's basically going undrafted here, guys. He's going as receiver 107, going as like pick 300. Okay, so very low risk, extremely high reward. And again, in the sense that he's a sleeper, but he's also a handcuff, because again, I do think he's much more of a replacement for Courtland Sutton than any other receiver for the Denver Broncos. That's going to do it for this video. If you enjoy the coverage, make sure to give a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be coming out with much more fantasy football coverage throughout the whole offseason to get you guys prepared for the full season. Make sure, again, to leave a like, comment your guys' favorite handcuff. If you guys agreed with the take, let me know in the comments. If you disagreed with the take, well, you're probably wrong, but let me know in the comment section why you might believe that. I'm kind of teasing, but it's always good to have some group thought going. Thanks for watching, guys. Good luck with all your best ball drafts, and as always, let's keep cashing.